You're really asking me for $99? He laughed, loud enough for the people in line to hear. Dad, maybe it's time you admit you can't manage your own money. His words cut deeper than I expected, not because of the number, but because of what it meant. That small, mocking smile carried every ounce of arrogance, every year of dismissal, every moment I'd been treated like I didn't matter. In that instant, something inside me broke, not with anger, but with clarity. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was realizing how little I meant to someone I had given everything to. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I'm Daniel Whitaker. Most people just call me Dan. I'm 61, and these days my life moves at the slow rhythm of the Deschutes River that bends around the edge of Bend, Oregon. The mornings here are pale silver, the air sharp with pine, and the faint smell of wood smoke drifting from chimneys. My cabin sits half hidden among the trees, a modest wooden house that creaks when the wind passes through the eaves. I built it myself 15 years ago, when Linda was still alive. She used to paint the mountains through the kitchen window and hum to whatever song the radio caught. 5 winters have passed since cancer took her, but I still set 2 mugs on the table every morning before I remember there's only me. I used to design control systems for aircraft and later moved into data analytics for wind energy projects. The world of equations and code made sense to me. People didn't always. After retiring, I began consulting for small renewable startups, but most folks in town think I'm just another old engineer living off a thin pension. I've never corrected them. Simplicity has its armor. What they don't know, what even my family doesn't, is that I still work late into the night on a quiet machine in my study, improving a predictive algorithm that grew into something far larger than I expected. But that secret stays buried for now. Most mornings I lace up my old running shoes and jog the river trail before dawn. The crunch of snow beneath my feet steadies my mind. When I return, I fix coffee, feed the pair of chickadees that perch by the window, and check the temperature gauge I built myself. The stillness after sunrise is something I never take for granted. It's the kind of silence that reminds a man he's survived more storms than he realized. I keep company with my neighbor, Bert Mason, 83, wiry as a fence post, a retired Marine who treats the world as a mission he hasn't quite finished. He lost his wife decades ago, yet he keeps her photograph on the mantle and talks to it like she's just stepped out to the porch. Sometimes we sit on his stoop sharing thermoses of coffee while the wind rolls through the valley. He once pressed a heavy coin into my palm, its surface worn smooth. "Keep it, Dan," he said, "to remember you're still worth something." I've carried it ever since, a small weight that anchors me when people look through me as if I'm air. My son, Ethan, does most of that looking. He's 28, clean-cut, ambitious, and newly appointed assistant branch manager at Cascade Meridian Bank downtown. He wears success like cologne, strong enough that everyone notices. When we talk, he calls me old school, in that careful, dismissive tone that sounds like respect until you listen closely. His wife, Kylie, smiles at me with perfect politeness, the kind that keeps her lipstick intact. They live in a polished townhouse with chrome fixtures and an espresso machine that costs more than my truck. I don't begrudge them. I just wish he'd remember the afternoons we once spent in the garage, soldering circuit boards while Linda baked pies and laughed at the two of us squinting through magnifying glasses. Somewhere between college loans and corporate ladders, that boy disappeared. My routine fills the spaces his absence leaves. On Saturdays, I volunteer at Westside Church, chopping vegetables for community dinners. The pastor jokes that I season everything like an engineer, precisely measured, no flair. Maybe he's right. Still, I enjoy the order of the kitchen, the predictable rhythm of knives against cutting boards, the small talk about weather and prayer lists. People there see me, not what I own. Evenings are quieter. I tinker with old radios, the kind that buzz before they find a signal. The static comforts me. Linda's voice echoes in the hum. Be kind, but be clear, she used to say. Her words are carved into the lid of the small wooden box on my shelf, a reminder that gentleness and boundaries can share the same heart. I suppose I've been better at the first than the second. Outside, the river glints under the moonlight. I sometimes wonder if Ethan ever pauses long enough to notice beauty that doesn't serve a purpose. The last time we spoke, he was bragging about quarterly targets and corporate bonuses. I told him to visit soon. He said the bank kept him busy. I didn't press. Pride is a fragile thing. You handle it wrong and it breaks, whether it's yours or someone else's. That night, as I locked the door and turned down the lights, the phone rang. Bert's voice crackled through the receiver. Weak but steady. His furnace had gone out again, and the repairman wanted $99 up front for a new sensor. Can't swing it till my check clears Monday, he said, embarrassed. I told him not to worry. I'll grab the cash in the morning, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. $99 wasn't much, but the thought of standing at Ethan's bank filled me with a strange unease I couldn't explain. I hung up and looked at Linda's box on the shelf. The moonlight hit the carved letters, be kind, but be clear. I nodded to the empty room, grabbed my coat from the hook, and set my wallet by the door. Outside, the snow kept falling in patient silence, covering every footprint from the day before. Tomorrow, I told myself, would just be another simple errand. I didn't know it would be the start of an earthquake. If you've ever been dismissed by the people who should have stood by you, stay with me, because what happens next will challenge everything you think. You know about dignity and silence. The next morning, the world outside my window was washed in pale gray. Snow sifted down in quiet layers, turning Bend into a painting of white silence. I drank my coffee slowly, letting the warmth fill the hollow space that conversations used to occupy. $99, that was all I needed. Just enough to help Bert keep the heat running. It should have been nothing, a simple errand. I pulled on my old wool coat and stepped outside. The Ford's engine coughed twice before catching. The heater barely worked, but I didn't mind. The town was waking up, storefront lights blinking on, plumes of breath rising from passers-by. I drove down Riverside Avenue, passing the same diner where Linda and I once ate Sunday breakfasts, and stopped at the intersection across from Cascade Meridian Bank. Its glass facade glimmered with the kind of corporate sterility that never fit into my world. Behind that glass, my son ruled his tiny empire. I parked and sat for a moment, watching the revolving door spin. For reasons I couldn't name, my palms were damp. I told myself it was ridiculous to feel nervous about withdrawing $99. Still, something in my chest tightened as I walked across the icy pavement. The warmth inside the bank hit me like a spotlight. The floor gleamed. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and expensive perfume. A row of customers stood before me, each absorbed in their phones. The soft click of keyboards and the mechanical hum of printers created a rhythm too efficient to feel human. I took a number and waited, nodding politely to the teller behind the counter. And then I heard a familiar voice, sharp, confident, the tone of someone who believed he was being watched and admired. Ethan was by the manager's station, laughing into his phone, sleeves rolled up just enough to show his designer watch. His laughter stopped when his eyes met mine. For a heartbeat, confusion crossed his face, followed by something colder. He hung up and walked toward me, his shoes clicking against the tile. "Well, look who decided to visit," he said loudly enough for the nearby customers to hear. "Dad, this is unexpected." "I just need to withdraw some cash," I said, keeping my voice even. $99. He smirked, the corners of his mouth curling with amusement. $99? Dad, we usually ask clients to make withdrawals in whole hundreds. You sure you don't want to round it up? A couple of tellers exchanged quick glances. Someone chuckled softly. I felt every eye turn in my direction. Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough for it to sting. "We don't usually get folks withdrawing pocket change. You sure you even have that much left?" The words landed like stones in the quiet. The teller in front of me froze, unsure whether to intervene. I could hear my own pulse, steady and humiliating. The room seemed brighter, sharper, as if the air itself was cutting. When I was younger, Ethan used to follow me into the garage while I tinkered with radio circuits. He'd ask questions, eager, curious. Somewhere along the way, curiosity turned into contempt. Now he stood before me, a man who measured worth in dollar signs. I took a slow breath and looked at him, not as my son, but as another stranger wearing his face. "It's fine," I said, my voice quiet. "Forget it." He blinked, confused. "What?" "I don't need it anymore." I turned away, sliding the withdrawal slip into my coat pocket. The silence that followed felt heavier than anger. As I walked toward the glass doors, I caught the reflection of us, him standing tall and polished, me a shadow fading from his frame. The automatic doors opened with a hiss that sounded like finality. Outside, the cold hit me, clean and merciless. The snow had thickened, erasing footprints as fast as they appeared. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching people hurry by, none of them aware that a small world had just collapsed inside that bank. I didn't feel rage. I felt something deeper, colder, like a lake freezing from the inside out. Every laugh, every glance from those tellers would fade, but the look in Ethan's eyes, the mockery of a son who once held my hand across the street, would stay. I walked back to the truck and sat there until the windshield fogged. The radio hissed with static when I turned it on, a thin thread of noise that reminded me of Linda's laugh. I whispered her old words, "Be kind, but be clear," and for the first time, I understood them as a warning, not advice. The drive home was slow. Snow coated the roads, muting the sound of the tires. The town looked peaceful, but I knew peace built on silence never lasts. Somewhere beneath that calm, a line had been crossed. When I parked in front of my cabin, the wind rattled the trees. I stayed inside the car for a long while, watching my breath fade on the glass. Then I looked up at the house, the soft glow from the living room window, the shadow of the wooden box on the shelf. Inside it waited Linda's message, her handwriting still as steady as ever. That afternoon, I would open the drawer to the USB drive labeled Kestrel 9. The algorithm I built years ago had been nothing but a project, a quiet triumph I never shared. But as the cold settled into my bones, I realized it was about to become something else entirely, a tool of clarity. The kind Linda would have understood. Tomorrow, I told myself, clarity would begin. If you're still watching and this story is pulling you in, drop a number 1 in the comments, because the moment you think things can't get worse, that's exactly when the ground begins to shift. The drive home felt longer than usual. Snow swirled across the highway, soft as dust, erasing the world a few feet at a time. My reflection in the windshield looked older, smaller, and somehow quieter. By the time I reached the cabin, the daylight had drained away. The house was cold, untouched since morning. I hung my coat on the hook, brushed the snow from my shoulders, and stood there for a moment, listening to the creaks of the wood settling. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and waited for it to hiss. The silence inside was heavy, the kind that fills a room after something inside you breaks. $99. How absurd that a number so small could strip a man bare. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam curling from my mug. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like an unseen animal. My eyes drifted to the shelf above the fireplace. Linda's photo smiled back at me, her paintbrush still caught midair in that frozen summer of years ago. Beside it sat the wooden box she'd carved before she passed, the words etched in neat lines. "Be kind, but be clear." I touched the carving lightly, as though her fingers still lingered there. For years, I'd lived by the first half of that sentence. Tonight, the second half finally made sense. I walked down the narrow hallway to my office, a small room lined with old manuals, cables, and 2 humming servers. The soft glow from the monitors painted the walls an electric blue. I hadn't intended to open this part of my life again, but some doors only stay closed as long as you're willing to be silent. I sat, entered my credentials, and watched the interface bloom across the screen. Granite Orchard LP, authorized access. Rows of data appeared, scrolling like scripture. Market projections, algorithmic patterns, and then the number that used to mean nothing to me, $1 billion and $10 million. I leaned back in the chair, the hum of the machine steady as a heartbeat. For years, I'd hidden Granite Orchard behind shell companies and encrypted contracts. It was more than a fund. It was a proof of concept, born from the code I wrote after Linda died. Kestrel 9, I'd called it, named after the falcon she once painted, circling over the cliffs near Cannon Beach. The algorithm could trace invisible flows of money across commodities, anticipating global shifts before they reached the headlines. Investors had called it genius. I called it survival. Building it gave me something to hold on to when grief threatened to drown me. I opened the custody file to review the last quarterly audit. Altamont Private Bank managed the assets now. I skimmed the acquisition reports and felt my stomach tighten. Altamont had recently purchased Cascade Meridian Bank to expand their retail division. My cursor hovered over the page. Ethan worked for Cascade Meridian, which meant, through a labyrinth of corporate ownership, my fund, my life's work, was effectively underwriting the bank that employed him. The irony burned cold. The same son who mocked me for asking for $99 was, in some twisted hierarchy, serving the system that depended on my capital. He had no idea he'd laughed in the face of the institution's most powerful client. I clicked open the compliance clause I'd written into my original agreement, the conduct and culture provision. My attorney, Amelia Ross, had helped craft it years ago. If any employee of a subsidiary engages in conduct detrimental to the dignity or trust of a client, Granite Orchard reserves the right to withdraw all assets immediately and require a full written explanation of cause. That clause wasn't meant as a weapon, only a safeguard. But tonight, its words gleamed like steel. Before acting, I checked the system logs for anomalies. My fingers hesitated when I saw a string of small test transactions, each for $7.03, tagged as honey tokens. They were security markers I'd placed to detect unauthorized access. One of them had been triggered 3 weeks earlier. I expanded the log. A digital fingerprint appeared, EWW. The initials matched only one person. A son who once trusted me with his science fair project had now tested the locks on my vault. I felt the air leave my lungs. Betrayal, I'd learned long ago, doesn't shout. It whispers through data trails and casual laughter in public places. I stared at the glowing screen, the green numbers cascading downward like falling snow. Then I picked up the phone and called Amelia. She answered on the second ring, her tone alert even at this late hour. "Amelia," I said, steady but distant. "We're invoking Section 10.3 of the Altamont Agreement. I want an emergency risk assessment meeting first thing tomorrow with Rylan Pierce, Regional Director. At Cascade Meridian." She paused. "Understood. Do you want to attend in person or send a proxy?" "In person," I said. "Use the alias K Nighthawk for the file." I hung up and exhaled slowly. The wind outside rattled the windows, like the world itself was shifting in its frame. I turned off one of the servers and sat in the blue half-light of the remaining screen. This wasn't vengeance, not really. It was the correction of a long imbalance. Respect was a currency too, and mine had been devalued long enough. Before shutting down the system, I opened a blank text document and typed 5 words. Be kind, but be clear. I saved the file under Linda's name and closed the lid. The hum of the machines faded until only silence remained. Tomorrow, the world that mocked me for $99 would remember exactly who I was. If this part has you holding your breath, type a number 1 below. What's coming next will turn humiliation into something far more powerful than revenge. The morning broke pale and soundless, the kind of cold that turned the air brittle. I woke before dawn, though I wasn't sure I had slept at all. The cabin was dim, the faint glow from the stove clock the only sign of life. I washed my face with water so cold it made my pulse jump. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like a man defeated. It looked like someone who had simply run out of patience. I dressed slowly, dark slacks, a navy sweater, the same gray tie Linda once bought me for a conference I never attended. No designer suit, no statement of wealth. The point wasn't to impress. It was to remind myself that authority didn't need decoration. I opened the curtains. Outside, Bend was wrapped in silver mist, rooftops gleaming under a thin coat of frost. For a moment, I thought of turning back, of letting the day pass like any other. But then I saw the wooden box on my desk, the carving catching the morning light. Be kind, but be clear. I checked my encrypted inbox. Amelia had confirmed the meeting for 9 a.m. sharp at the Cascade Meridian branch. The subject line read, Attendees, R. Pierce, Regional Director, Compliance Officer, Representative, K. Nighthawk, Granite Orchard LP. Seeing the alias typed out made something inside me settle. I attached the files I'd prepared, the contractual clause on conduct and culture, the server logs of the 7.03 Honey Token breach, and the signature marked EKEW, 3 letters that would soon redefine a father and a son. I brewed coffee, packed my documents into a slim leather folder, and slipped the old silver coin Bert had given me into my coat pocket. Before leaving, I looked once more around the living room. Everything was still. Linda's painting of the coast, the clock that had stopped ticking years ago, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I whispered to no one in particular, this isn't revenge, it's just the truth catching up. The road into town was half buried in snowmelt. The radio crackled between stations before landing on a soft jazz tune. I drove past the same landmarks, Hardware Lane, the coffee shop, the frozen pond where Ethan learned to skate when he was 8. He'd fallen that day and cried until I carried him off the ice. The memory felt foreign now, like a story belonging to someone else. When I pulled into the bank's parking lot, a sleek black sedan already waited near the entrance. 2 men in overcoats stood beside it, checking their watches. One of them was Ryland Pierce, Altamont's regional director. I'd met him once years ago during a charity fund audit. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. Respect, recognition, a hint of unease. Mr. Nighthawk, he said, reaching out both hands. It's an honor. We didn't expect, well, not in person. Some matters require presence, I replied. My voice came out steady, detached. Behind the glass, I spotted Ethan. He was laughing with a young teller, leaning casually against the counter. He hadn't noticed me yet. The sight of him like that, relaxed, untouchable, didn't hurt anymore. It only clarified what needed to be done. Rylan ushered me through the revolving door. The sudden warmth of the lobby met the chill on my skin like a clash of 2 worlds. A few employees glanced up. Their smiles faltered when Rylan addressed me with the kind of deference usually reserved for executives. Right this way, Mr. Nighthawk. The conference room is ready. Ethan turned at the sound of my pseudonym, brow furrowing as he caught sight of me walking beside the director. I watched confusion twist into disbelief. He looked from me to Rylan, then back again, as if the image refused to align in his mind. Dad, he said uncertainly, stepping forward. Rylan's head jerked toward him. Excuse me? This is your father? The room fell silent. I could feel every breath in the building hanging midair. Ethan's composure cracked. I didn't know he was with you. Rylan's tone hardened. Mr. Whitaker, please return to your station. This meeting is confidential. Ethan hesitated, then nodded, the color draining from his face. Inside the glass-walled conference room, the world outside blurred into reflections. I sat at the center of the table. Rylan took a seat opposite me. The compliance officer opened her laptop, typing furiously. Thank you for making time, I began. Granite Orchard represents a significant partnership with Altamont. I'm here to evaluate a breach in what I call ethical equilibrium. Rylan nodded. Of course. We've read the preliminary brief. I assure you, any concern will be addressed. This isn't about concern, I interrupted softly. It's about accountability. The compliance officer stopped typing. Rylan shifted in his chair. I slid the printed clause across the table, followed by the digital report showing the Honey Token trigger and the forged request. This transaction originated from a Cascade Meridian terminal. And unfortunately, it aligns with misconduct I personally experienced here yesterday. Outside, through the frosted glass, I could see Ethan standing motionless near his office door. Rylan's eyes scanned the documents. The blood drained from his face as the realization dawned. He whispered, "Your account, Granite Orchard holds $1.01 billion, I said, and per Section 10.3, I reserve the right to withdraw it immediately should the integrity of your institution fail to meet my standards." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the air vent. Ryland swallowed, his voice a notch above a whisper. "Mr. Nighthawk, we will resolve this. At once." I leaned back, folding my hands. "Then let's begin." Through the glass, I caught Ethan's wide eyes fixed on me. His father, the man he had ridiculed for $99, now holding the fate of his career and his bank in the palm of his hand. But I didn't gloat. I simply looked at him and said, barely audible, "This is what clarity looks like." The compliance officer began making calls. The system freeze order would take effect within the hour. And as the first notifications started pinging across their monitors, I felt no triumph, only the quiet gravity of a storm finally gathering its shape. If you're still with me right now, let me know by commenting number 1 below, because the smallest decision he makes here will ignite a chain reaction no one sees coming. The conference room pulsed with tension. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above us, steady and merciless. On the table, my signature glowed on the screen, beside a string of numbers that could make or unmake empires. Ryland's assistant whispered updates into her headset, her fingers trembling as she typed. Every few seconds, another alert blinked across the monitors, warnings cascading through the system like falling dominoes. The decision had been made. The contract clause was active. Granite Orchard LP was withdrawing every cent, $1.01 billion, out of Altamont Private Bank and all its subsidiaries. The bank's global servers automatically triggered a freeze protocol, halting transactions to prevent collapse. Within minutes, every branch from Portland to Chicago began flashing red alerts. "Mr. Nighthawk," Ryland said, voice tight, "are you certain about this? The system, our liquidity, it's going to lock entirely until the transfer clears." "I'm not here to destroy you," I said calmly. "I'm here to remind you what respect looks like in a system that forgot it." He swallowed, gave a stiff nod, and turned to his compliance team. "Initiate the asset transfer. Market high priority." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, this will freeze all connected accounts, corporate, retail, internal." "Do it," he snapped. Her trembling hand hit the confirmation key. A low chime filled the room, followed by the words spreading across every monitor. "Asset transfer in progress. $1.010 billion. Somewhere outside, alarms began to ping. Phones rang in rapid succession. Employees darted through the lobby, confusion mounting. Through the glass, I saw Ethan appear near the front desk, talking urgently to one of the tellers. His movements were sharp, frantic. He didn't yet understand what was happening, but he was about to. Ryland's phone buzzed violently. He read the message, face draining of color. "Sir," the compliance officer said, "we just got a report from IT. There's been a security flag linked to this branch. Unauthorized access to a private custody account." "What?" Ryland snapped. She turned the screen toward him. The audit log displayed a digital fingerprint. Ethan.w@cascadebank.com. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. Ryland's gaze shot toward the lobby. "Bring him in," he ordered. 2 security guards moved before Ethan could react. He looked startled, confused, but when he saw my face through the glass wall, something in him broke. "Dad?" His voice was muffled, desperate. They led him inside. "Dad, I don't understand. What's going on?" I didn't answer. I simply watched him. The boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms, now trembling before a crowd of strangers. Ryland pointed to the screen. "This your login, Mr. Whitaker?" Ethan stared at it as if it were written in a foreign language. "That's not... it was just a test account. I never accessed..." "The system logs disagree," Ryland said. It originated from your workstation, your credentials. Ethan turned to me, eyes pleading. Dad, please. I wasn't trying to steal from you. I just wanted to see what you were hiding. I didn't mean... I stood, every movement deliberate. My chair scraped softly against the tile. You tested my balance, I said quietly. And I tested your character. He flinched. We both got our answers. The guards shifted uneasily. Ethan's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. You can fix this, he whispered. You have to. They'll fire me. They'll ruin me. I met his gaze and felt something deeper than anger, grief perhaps, or the slow recognition of final distance. Consequences are the last form of respect we owe ourselves, I said. Ryland's voice cut in, cold and formal. Effective immediately, Ethan Whitaker. You are suspended pending investigation. The guards moved toward him. Ethan's composure shattered. Dad, don't let them, please. His words echoed across the marble lobby, raw and human, but I didn't turn back. As I stepped out of the conference room, the bank had transformed into a hive of panic. Employees fielded endless calls, their faces pale under the harsh lights. The central display showed a map of the U.S., each Altamont branch glowing red. One of the technicians muttered, "It's spreading system-wide." I reached the revolving door just as my phone vibrated. Amelia's voice came through, calm but urgent. Dan, the freeze you triggered, it's global, she said. That clause you wrote? It applied to every account in Altamont's custody network. The entire system is down. For a moment, I didn't speak. Outside, snow was falling harder, blurring the world into white noise. How long until they recover? I asked. Hours, maybe days. You've just paused billions in movement. You should know. You didn't just humble a bank. You woke a sleeping giant. I hung up and stood in the doorway. Behind me, the alarms continued to pulse, an electric heartbeat of chaos. People ran, shouted, called for answers. My son's voice was somewhere among them, distant, broken. I walked into the snow. Each step felt heavier than the last. The cold bit into my skin, grounding me. I stopped halfway across the plaza and looked back at the glass tower. The lights flickered, distorted by the storm. This isn't revenge, I murmured. It's correction. Somewhere deep inside, I could still hear Linda's voice. Steady, kind, unflinching. Be kind, but be clear. I had been both. As I turned toward the parking lot, the wind caught my coat, carrying the faint echo of alarms behind me. The world would take hours to stabilize, the markets days to recover, and my son a lifetime to understand what really froze that day. It wasn't the system. It was the bond between us. The drive home felt endless. Snow blurred the horizon into a colorless wash, and the road ahead vanished into mist. The radio filled the silence with urgency voices reporting the Altamont freeze. Headlines repeating words like unprecedented, crisis, billion-dollar withdrawal. I turned it off. The quiet that followed was heavier than noise. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked untouched, like it had been holding its breath. I stepped inside and was met with the soft ticking of the wall clock and the faint scent of pine from the old floorboards. My hands were trembling slightly. It wasn't adrenaline anymore. It was gravity, the weight of what I'd done. I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window. Outside, the snow fell slower now, flakes drifting instead of racing. I could still see the reflection of the bank's glass facade in my mind, the panic, the alarms, Ethan's pale face. The silence of my house felt like judgment. The computer screen glowed faintly on my desk. I clicked through the flood of emails, press inquiries, legal notices, encrypted reports from Amelia. One subject line stopped me cold. Ethan Whitaker, compliance escalation. I opened it. Amelia's words were direct as always. Dan, the Federal Compliance Office has been notified. Ethan's signature on the fake authorization ties him to the fraud case. The review has been elevated to criminal investigation. I stared at the message until the words blurred. This was never supposed to go that far. The lesson had become a sentence. My gaze drifted to Linda's photo on the mantle. She was smiling that calm, knowing smile she wore whenever I let logic outweigh empathy. Kindness isn't weakness, she'd once told me. It's strength with boundaries. I'd built walls, not boundaries. The phone vibrated. I didn't recognize the number at first, but instinct told me who it was. I hesitated, then answered. "Dad," Ethan's voice cracked. They've suspended my credentials. There's an investigation. I can't even access my own email." He took a shaky breath. "I deserve this. I know I do. I just wanted to understand you, to see what made you so distant all those years. I didn't mean to cross the line." His words came out fragmented, tangled between regret and exhaustion. I let the silence stretch. There was nothing I could say that would erase the past. Not his arrogance, not my pride. Finally, I said, "You crossed it because you thought there wasn't one. You thought respect was something owed, not earned." "I know," he whispered. "I know that now." I looked at the snow outside, the way the streetlights fractured it into gold and silver dust. For the first time in years, I didn't see the boy who mocked me or the man who betrayed me. I saw a son standing where I once stood, angry, lost, afraid of being small. "You'll face what comes," I said softly, "but you don't have to face it alone." On the other end, he sobbed once, quietly. "Thank you, Dad." I didn't reply. The line went still, then clicked off. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the faint light of the computer monitor. Then I opened a new email to Amelia. My fingers moved slower than usual. "Proceed with withdrawal as planned," I typed. "But remove Ethan's name from the fraud submission. Redirect his case to internal compliance. No federal escalation. This is final." I sent it before I could second-guess myself. The whoosh of the outgoing message sounded like something breaking loose inside me. Maybe guilt, maybe relief. I leaned back and exhaled. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth stretching across the room. The shadows danced against Linda's photo, and for a moment, I imagined her nodding. "You were right," I whispered. "Boundaries, not walls." Outside, the storm had passed. The snow settled into calm mounds of white, untouched and clean. The world was still, fragile, waiting for the thaw. I closed my eyes, feeling the faint pulse of peace return. The bank would recover, the system would restart, and my son would carry his scars. But tonight, I'd made my choice, to end the war without losing what was left of my humanity. A week passed before the noise began to fade. The blizzard was gone, the snow melting into thin streams that carved their way down the roads like silver veins. I sat in my living room, coffee cooling in my hands, while the television droned in the background. "Altamont Bank continues to recover from last week's unprecedented system freeze," the anchor announced. "CEO Martin Leahy has resigned amid regulatory investigations. Experts say it will take months for the network to regain stability." The camera cut to the bank's headquarters, reporters crowding the steps, microphones thrust toward nervous executives. Then came the words that made me exhale, slow and steady. Sources confirm that the mysterious investor known only as K. Nighthawk initiated the transfer that triggered the shutdown. I turned off the TV. The room fell quiet again, save for the faint creak of the old floorboards. They were talking about me, and yet they weren't. The man on the news was an idea, a ghost of control and precision. I was just Dan Whitaker, sitting in a cabin that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. My inbox was flooded with messages. Amelia's legal summaries, financial outlets asking for comments, encrypted memos from Ryland Pierce. One line from him stood out. "Mr. Nighthawk, the system is stable again. Your withdrawal will be finalized this week. We've learned more from you than from any audit." I deleted it. The point had never been to teach them a lesson. Amelia's latest email came next. Ethan's name had been cleared from the federal investigation. "Your request was honored," she wrote. "He's been reassigned to an internal role. No prosecution." I leaned back, staring out of the window at the gray-blue horizon. The storm had done its damage, The world would recover, so would he. 2 days later, I drove through town for the first time since everything happened. The streets were quiet, the snowbanks shrinking under the sun. When I passed Cascade Meridian Bank, I slowed. Through the wide front window, I saw Ethan sorting files at a desk near the back. No suit, no authority, just a man doing honest work. For a brief second, he looked up. Our eyes met across the glass. He didn't smile, didn't wave, neither did I. But in that glance, something shifted. Recognition, maybe forgiveness, maybe both. I kept driving. The next morning, a knock came at my door. It was Mrs. Gable, bundled in her thick brown coat, holding a pie dish that smelled like apples and cinnamon. "I thought you could use something warm," she said, eyes twinkling. "You've been on the news, you know. They're saying some mysterious man shut down the whole banking system. You wouldn't happen to know him, would you?" I smiled faintly. "I just plant things, Mrs. Gable," she laughed. "Well, maybe the world needed a little freeze to start growing again." After she left, I stood at the doorway, watching the sunlight melt the last traces of ice from the porch steps. Her words stayed with me. Maybe it really did take a freeze to make things grow again. That evening, I drafted one final message to Amelia. Transfer $10 million from Granite Orchard to the Bend Community Library Trust. Allocate funds for an outdoor reading garden in memory of Linda Whitaker. Use the rest to start financial literacy programs for local youth. When I hit send, a soft peace settled over me, not triumph, just completion. Later, I walked to the edge of the small garden behind my house. The soil was damp, streaked with early sprouts pushing through. I knelt and touched the ground, the scent of thawing earth rising into the cool air. The wind carried the faint hum of town traffic, a reminder that life had moved on, and so had I. The sun dipped low behind the trees, and for the first time in years, the silence felt kind. I whispered to the fading light. The storm came, the ice broke, and now it grows. Linda would have liked that. Spring came early that year, soft and quiet. The air smelled of thawed earth and lilacs as I stood at the edge of the new library garden. The sign still wore its white covering, ready to be unveiled. Linda Whitaker Learning Garden. Children ran between the benches, laughter bubbling through the morning breeze. Parents took pictures, and volunteers placed the last potted flowers near the walkway. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. When the library director called my name, I walked up to the small podium. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the strange weight of calm. Faces turned toward me, neighbors, teachers, families I'd seen in grocery store aisles. They didn't know the full story of who I was or what had happened. Maybe that was for the best. "I built this garden," I began, "not to honor wealth or legacy, but kindness. My wife, Linda, believed that learning could grow anywhere if you gave it light." My voice steadied as I went on. "This garden is for those moments when you forget that knowledge and compassion can share the same soil." Applause came gently, more like gratitude than celebration. I stepped down and found a quiet corner beneath the oak tree, breathing in the scent of new grass. That was when I noticed him, Ethan, standing near the back of the crowd. He wore a simple gray shirt, sleeves rolled, hair a little longer than I remembered. For a moment, time folded. The boy who used to follow me around the workshop had returned in the shape of a man humbled by his own mistakes. After the crowd dispersed, he walked toward me, hesitant but steady. "Dad," he said softly, reaching into his pocket. "I thought you might want this." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a faded photograph. Linda, sitting in the backyard. Ethan on her lap, me kneeling beside them, dirt under my fingernails. We were laughing about something forgotten. "Mom would have been proud," Ethan said. "And so am I." No speeches, no apologies, just that. I nodded, unable to speak, and for the first time in years, the silence between us felt whole again. Later, as the sun began to dip, I sat on a bench near the fountain. Mrs. Gable appeared, wearing her sun hat and holding a cup of lemonade. "You've planted more than trees today, Dan," she said. "You've planted peace." Maybe that's what Linda wanted all along, I replied. Not success, just stillness. She smiled and wandered off, leaving me with the hum of bees and the gentle clatter of wind chimes. My phone buzzed, a call from Amelia. Your story's spreading, she said. A national magazine wants to feature you, the anonymous investor who froze the banking world. I laughed quietly. Tell them I'm just a gardener now. You mean that? I do. I hung up before she could say more, setting the phone beside me. For once, I didn't feel pulled toward the noise of the world. A little girl ran over, her hands cupped around something small. Mister, she said shyly, my mom said you make things grow. Can you plant this for me? She opened her palms. Inside was a single sunflower seed. I smiled and knelt beside her, pressing it gently into the soil, near the sign with Linda's name. Then let's make this one count, I whispered. The wind carried the scent of lilac again. Light filtered through the branches, scattering gold across the path. I sat there, watching the garden sway like a living heartbeat, feeling the quiet bloom of forgiveness take root inside me. The world didn't need to know who I was. The people who mattered already did. And as the sun slipped behind the hills, I realized that the greatest investment I'd ever made wasn't in numbers or networks. It was in love, the kind that grows even after the frost. By summer, the garden had grown into something alive and untamed. Wildflowers spilled past the fences, bees hovered lazily between the lavender and daisies, and children's laughter drifted from the library windows. I walked the stone path every morning, watering the new seedlings and greeting the volunteers who waved as they passed. It wasn't wealth that made me feel rich. It was this quiet rhythm, this small piece of the world that no longer demanded anything from me. Ethan and I had begun writing letters, real letters, the kind you can hold and reread when the day feels long. He was working for a nonprofit now, mentoring young entrepreneurs who wanted to build something meaningful instead of something big. His latest note came yesterday. I finally understand what you meant by respect, Dad. It isn't about control, it's about care. I'd read it 3 times before folding it carefully into my jacket pocket. For years, I'd wanted him to understand that one truth, and now he finally did. Maybe that was all the closure I needed. One afternoon, a messenger arrived with a letter embossed with the seal of Granite Orchard. Ryland Pierce's signature was scrawled neatly at the bottom. Mr. Whitaker, we would be honored if you'd accept the position of chair for our new Global Ethics Advisory Board. I smiled and set the letter aside. The irony wasn't lost on me. A man who once froze the banking world now being asked to guide its conscience. I wrote a short reply that evening. I've served my time in the storm. It's someone else's turn to steer the ship. Then I closed my laptop for what felt like the last time. The next day I went to the bank, not as a customer, not as a silent investor, but as a man ready to let go. I closed the last account tied to Shellstone Holdings, the company that had once been my shield and my weapon. The banker, a young woman with a polite smile, asked if I was sure. Completely, I said. Some investments just need to rest. I left the building lighter than when I entered. That night, I sat on my porch as fireflies blinked across the yard. The air was warm, carrying the faint smell of honeysuckle. I tilted my head back, searching the stars like I used to do with Linda. You were right, I whispered. We don't own peace. We grow it. The breeze shifted, and for a moment, I could almost hear her laugh in the rustle of the leaves. A week later, I stopped by the grocery store and met a young man at the counter, early 20s, bright eyes, name tag that read Tom. As he rang up my items, his gaze lingered. You're him, aren't you? He asked shyly. The man who froze the system? I chuckled. I was. Now I just thaw gardens, he grinned. Maybe the world needs more gardeners. Maybe it does, I said, handing him the cash. Outside, the sun was setting in streaks of gold and copper. I drove my old pickup down the quiet road that curved toward the river. The radio hummed with some old country tune Linda used to sing. As I crossed the bridge, the light caught the windshield just right, filling the cab with a warm golden glow. A small envelope slid from the dashboard onto my lap. Inside was a single seed, Ethan's handwriting on the corner, for the next garden. I smiled, tucked it into my shirt pocket, and kept driving. Some stories end with a grand finale. Mine ends like this: a road stretching ahead, a sun that keeps rising, and a seed waiting for soil. I had spent a lifetime building systems, hoarding numbers, and guarding silence. Now, I finally understood. Peace doesn't come when the world bows to you. It comes when you stop needing it to. The first chill of autumn had just arrived. Mist clung to the hills like breath on glass, softening the world into shades of gold and gray. I sat on the wooden bench at the top of the hill behind the library, the same spot where Linda used to read on quiet mornings. Below me, the garden shimmered in the thin sunlight, children picking apples, a few adults sipping coffee under the pergola, laughter carried by the breeze. Life had gone on. It always does. The cup in my hand steamed faintly. I wasn't thinking about markets or numbers anymore. Those used to be my oxygen, measurable, predictable, safe. But life had never been safe. It had only ever been real. As I watched the trees sway, a thought came uninvited, quiet but sure. Our hearts are like banks. We deposit love, trust, time. Some people invest back, others withdraw until we're empty. I used to believe losing everything was failure. Now I knew better. Sometimes, closing the account is the only way to protect what's left of your worth. A crunch of gravel drew my attention. Ethan was walking up the hill, a thermos in one hand and a small notebook in the other. He looked older somehow, steadier, grounded. He handed me the thermos, then the notebook. "For you," he said. On the cover, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Lessons from my father." Inside, each page held short quotes, things I'd said over the years, written in his voice. Silence isn't weakness. It's choosing your battlefield. Kindness is not currency. Spend it anyway. Respect isn't given. It's built like a bridge, one quiet stone at a time. I didn't know what to say. Pride and humility tangled in my chest. I looked at my son, the boy who had once mocked me for asking for $99, and realized that somewhere between the storm and the stillness, we had found our way back. He sat beside me, and for a long moment we just listened to the wind hum through the branches. "You did good, Dad," he said finally. "So did you," I replied. He smiled, eyes wet but bright. "I had a good teacher." We didn't need to say more. Words would have ruined the quiet perfection of that morning. After he left, I opened my journal, its pages weathered, edges curled from years of use, and wrote one final line. I withdrew my anger, my fear, and my silence. What remained was peace, and that was enough. I closed the book and carried it down to the young apple tree Ethan and I had planted last spring. The trunk had grown thicker, the leaves glowing amber in the sun. I placed the journal at its base, tucking it gently beneath the soil. When the wind blew, a few golden leaves drifted down to cover it, as if the earth itself was sealing the story. From the distance came the faint chime of the library bell, marking noon. Life continued, quiet, rhythmic, beautiful. I realized I didn't miss the rush of control anymore. I didn't crave recognition or victory. All I wanted was this: mornings filled with light, evenings with memory, and a heart that no longer kept score. We spend our lives chasing currencies of pride, validation, and success. But the real wealth is quiet. It's sitting in the stillness, with nothing to prove and feeling full anyway. As I stood and looked down at the garden, at laughter, at growth, at the life reborn from ruin, I whispered to the wind, "Some accounts close with profit. Mine closed with peace." The breeze carried my words into the valley below, scattering them like seeds. Maybe they would grow somewhere. Maybe they already had. There comes a point in every life when the noise fades, and what remains is the quiet truth of who we have become. The journey through betrayal, loss, and redemption is rarely about others. It is about ourselves. It is the slow, unglamorous work of learning that dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. And that real strength is never loud. It lives in stillness, in boundaries held, in the refusal to let bitterness define us. In a world that worships wealth, people often forget that success measured in numbers is fragile. It can vanish overnight, leaving nothing but the echo of ambition. But the kind built from integrity, the kind rooted in decency, compassion, and courage, endures. It doesn't glitter, but it glows. It's the light that remains when everything else burns out. Sometimes life forces us to lose what we thought mattered most, only to reveal what truly does. Every wound carries a lesson, and every silence holds a chance to listen. To our conscience, to our purpose, to the parts of us that cannot be bought or broken. What once feels like punishment can become a doorway if we walk through it with grace instead of anger. Peace is not a trophy earned through revenge or power. It is a choice, made again and again, to rise above the noise and live by values that don't need validation. Forgiveness, too, is not about excusing what happened. It is about refusing to let the pain continue its rule. When we forgive, we free ourselves first. The truest wealth is measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we give without fear of loss. A kind word, an honest act, a moment of stillness. These are the currencies that never lose value. And perhaps the most profound legacy any person can leave is not fortune or fame, but the quiet example of having lived with honor. Because when the final chapter closes and the world grows silent again, all that truly matters is that we loved well, lived truthfully, and left behind a little more light than we found. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.